friends, welcome to my channel. My name is Danni, and today is the second episode of Fantasy Genre Blends. Before we get started talking about the books that I read and the books that I want to read, I want to know if you guys have any recommendations for me. Are there any books that you've read recently that blend fantasy with other genres that you've really enjoyed? Let me know in the comments down below. So if you guys didn't watch the first episode, I organized these in such a way that I tell you guys about a few books that I've read recently that I really enjoyed, that I mentioned in the last episode, and then I also will mention a few books that I'm interested in reading in the future. And all of these books have one thing in common, and that is the fact that they are fantasy mixed with some other genre. So my goal in this is to figure out which form of fantasy blends I tend to enjoy more, and to kind of expand my reading to maybe find some hidden gems that I wouldn't have originally reached for. So unfortunately, the 3 books that I gave you guys last time did not end up great. I had 1 win and then 2 losses. So I'm going to talk about the win first and the 2 losses, and then we'll get on to my TBR for the next couple of months. So the first book that we're going to talk about is The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, which I really enjoyed. I rated this book 4 stars, and I have talked about this recently in a wrap-up, and so I will link that video below for you if you want more details. But essentially, the synopsis of this book, you have a mystery happening, and these women who are I want to call them historical women, but they're women who are in fantasy novels and fictional novels that we've read about in the past. And so you have Frankenstein's daughter, you have Dr. Moreau's daughter, you have Dr. Jekyll's daughter, and all of these women come together and essentially they find a family amongst themselves, and they get themselves into a little bit of an investigation and help solve this mystery, and so we follow their journey together. I really enjoyed how this story was formatted. We are essentially reading the novel that one of these ladies has written afterwards, describing how they solved this mystery, and in the background you have the ladies actually commenting on whether or not they agree or disagree, or essentially just giving their own narrative of what was said about them in the book, which I really happened to enjoy. I did listen to this on audio, which I think kind of gave it even that little bit of a pop where you can kind of hear the different women corresponding with each other. It was really a fun book. So if you are interested in historical fiction and you have loved any of the books that I mentioned, then you should give this one a try. So moving on to the books that I didn't enjoy quite as much. So I'm going to start with one that I don't really have a lot to say, and that is The Library at Mount Char. I don't think I'm going to give this a rating, and that is because I DNF'd this book. This is a soft DNF, so I'm not saying that I will never read this, or maybe I will even get to it in the recent future or the near future, but for right now it just wasn't the right time for me to read it. That book is actually the reason it took me so long to get the second episode up, because I was trying to kind of chug my way through and it just wasn't hitting for me. The book was first off, it's fantasy horror, so if you have never heard of the Library at Mount Char, you start with this individual who is at this place that she calls the library, and she's talking about this person that she calls her father, and she's walking along a street covered in blood. That's kind of where you start the book. And so at first it was really interesting. I wanted to know what her story was. Then you run into her quote-unquote siblings at the library and some oddities with them. And so that part of the story I found interesting. I wanted to know what was happening. But the book had this really jarring form of horror that I'm not used to. You would have this very subtle, almost contemporary story that you're like reading about like a piece of these people's lives, and then all of a sudden this really horrible element would come up, which maybe that's typical in horror. I don't read a lot of horror, and so maybe that's just me not being used to the genre, but that was really jarring to me. There were also just some of the characters, the writing and the characters also seemed, I don't know, jarring is the word I would use. You would have someone that was having like a normal conversation, and then all of a sudden they would say something really crude or really disturbing. it was just really off-putting and disorienting at times. I didn't really know if I was supposed to be following along with what was happening. I got 132 pages into the book, and I think the book's like maybe the book's close to 400 pages if I remember correctly. And so, like I said, it's a softie enough. Maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset to read it, or maybe the entire book is like that. I'm not sure. If you have read this and loved it, please let me know, or if you didn't like it, let me know why, so I can figure out whether or not I want to continue. And the next book. So this one might be why you're watching this video. If you watched a video a couple weeks ago, I kind of hinted that I would have a little bit of a rant about this book, and so I do have timestamps down below if you guys do not want spoilers. And I will have a spoiler stamp up here if I give any spoilers, which I will for this particular book, and that is Ordinary Monsters. This was one of my most anticipated books of the year. I thought I was going to love this. It sounded really interesting. This is historical fiction fantasy, and so you follow these, this is just the synopsis, so this isn't any spoilers, but you follow these two young boys who have gifts. And so they have kind of these magical abilities, and this shadowy figure is hunting them. And then on top of that, you also have this institution, this like magical school essentially, that is also following them or trying to find them. And so you follow their journey throughout this book with those two pieces in mind, the magical school and then also the shadowy creature that is hunting them. So what can I say? So if you want my non-spoilery thoughts, you should watch my wrap-up. I do talk about this in my, I think it was last month's wrap-up, which I'll link if you're interested in non-spoilers. But at this point, I'm going to get into talking about why I didn't like this book, and this part will include spoilers. And like I said, I'll put spoilers up on the screen whenever I am talking about them. So I'll start by talking about the fact that this book is very slow-paced. Which is fine. I don't mind a slow-paced book, but I expect that if it is slow-paced, the pieces that you get throughout the book to actually tie back together. So I'll give you an example. At the very beginning of the book, you follow this little boy's adoptive mother, even though that's not what she was, but this woman finds this young baby on a train as she is escaping a sexual assault. So she is running from this man and gets on a train to get away from him, finds this young baby, and you kind of see her story before you get to the baby, Marlowe, who is one of the gifted boys that we follow. And you follow her story with him, and then she disappears. And then you never get to see anything else from her. You never get to see like where her story ended up. Every once in a while she's mentioned when Marlowe is like having a growth arc or whatever, but it's not, I don't want to say it's not important, because I think the point was to build that kind of, that character, that sorrow and kind of bad start that Marlowe had to life. And it does at one point, once again, spoilers, ties back to he was stolen from the Institute when he was a baby, and she took him with her, the lady who died on the train, and so it kind of ties back together, but the actual woman who took Marlowe in is pretty much never talked about again. And we got to live through a pretty horrible event with her, and her running from people and having to live in the shadows because she doesn't want this man who is sexually assaulting her to find her. And that wasn't the only instance. You also had the instance of the people who were essentially taking care of the kids who had volunteered to be, I forget what it was called, but like the oracle, the tree thing, the kids that decided that they wanted to try and help be, the guardian of that door. They became invalids, and so you have these people who live in a town nearby who are taking care of the kids who can't take care of themselves anymore. And that was an offshoot that I thought was pretty interesting, and I wanted to know those people's story. And you get a little bit of it, and then you never see it again. And that was frustrating. Like, it made the pace of the story so slow, but it also was like very jittery. Like you'd get something here and then immediately get pulled away from it. Get something here, immediately get pulled away from it. And that happened throughout the entire book. It was very frustrating. It took you out of the story. I was constantly wondering about which characters I needed to pay attention to and which ones wouldn't matter in a couple of pages. That was very frustrating. Next, the second bullet on my list is I thought the shadowy figure, so Jacob, was super underdeveloped. Like they try and make him have a backstory, and I thought like the backstory that they originally gave him was good and a compelling story, and you kind of, you know, you feel for him, which I think was the point of their original story, of his brother dying and him, you know, going on this quest to help his brother. But then within seconds of you actually being in that, like where you figure out, oh, he's doing this because he's trying to save his brother, he gets pulled into the other world. Sorry, I read this a little bit ago, so I'm forgetting what everything was called, but the other world that he gets pulled into, and essentially the dark evil thing that is controlling him tells him, oh yeah, we can't actually save your brother. Like, he's not savable. And then he continues to do this evil creature's bidding. Like, that was the whole purpose of why he wanted to, or why he turned dark. Like, he wasn't actually a dark person, but as soon as, like, it just fell apart. It was really frustrating. Also, like, his Jacob, you know, to kind of grow off what I've already said, Jacob at one point in time mentions to Marlowe that he didn't want to kill Marlowe because it wasn't Marlowe's fault, that Marlowe was innocent. But he kills a whole bunch of people for the evil being, like, which also didn't deserve it. So there were contradictions within the story itself, which was frustrating. I need to stop saying frustrating. How many times have I said it already? But his character in general, I think, could have been really cool, but it was like the author was trying to put him in so many different places. They wanted you to feel for him. They wanted him to be, you know, a good guy that was, you know, just put in the wrong circumstances. They wanted him to, you know, have this arc. But in the process of having the arc, there were all these holes. Like, I don't know, his character just fell flat to me. And the last thing I'll mention, and then I'll be done with my little rant, is towards the end of the storyline. So we follow multiple POVs, and every once in a while we'll be in other people's heads, which is fine, but the way that the story indicated when you were switching mind frames changed towards the end of the story. So it used to be like, if you changed chapters between two POVs, or maybe there was a paragraph break if they happened to be like in the same location, but it wanted to indicate that, okay, here we were talking about one person, little paragraph break, okay, now we're talking in, you know, we're in another person's mind. Those were things I could follow, but towards the end of the book, there were a couple of chapters, which is the bizarre piece. Towards the end of the book, there started to be pieces where you were in 5 characters' minds all on one page with no paragraph breaks, no like fancy little symbols saying like, okay, we're doing something different now. It was just paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, and you were supposed to follow, because of the context in the paragraph, whose brain you were in, which you could do. Like, I could figure out whose head I was in, but it was I mean, this is going to sound horrible, but it was way too much work. After having kind of the set, like, okay, change of chapter or paragraph breaks, getting used to changing characters, and then all of a sudden you give me no indication at all that I'm changing characters. That part was weird to me and totally took me out of the story. I had to reread several pages to just make sure that I understood what I was supposed to get from those pages, which, because of the whole slow pacing, you know, a lot of it ended up not being necessary for me to reread. So yeah, this book was frustrating for me. There is the key word, if you haven't gotten it so far. I'm not a fan. I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's a waste of time. It's almost 700 pages. It's sad that I didn't like it, because I really enjoy the premise of the whole thing, but it just didn't deliver. Now, I should say, if you read that book, or if you want to read that book, please do. Don't let me decide for you what to read or what not to read, please listen to a whole bunch of different reviews and see if maybe it sounds like something you would enjoy. With such a long book, I know that, we have a limited amount of time to read what we want to read, and I would hate for someone to spend 700 pages thinking that it's going to all tie up in a pretty little bow, and it doesn't. Okay, brief break from the episode really quick. I just want to talk about a few books that I read that would tie into my fantasy genre blends, what their ratings were. I'm not going to give you guys a full synopsis or rundown of these books by any means, because this was not part of the original series, but they do fit into kind of the fantasy genre blends, and so I just want to make sure that I list them if you guys are wanting recommendations for fantasy books that have other genres in them. I figured I'd throw a few out at you that I've read recently. And all of these I do have listed in other wrap-ups, so I'll link those videos if you guys want to actually have the full review of those books. So if you are looking for some fantasy historical fiction, I have read Changeless and Blameless, which is part of the Parasol Protectorate by Gail Carriger, I believe is her name, which I rated both 4 stars. They are excellent. If you like Victorian era, that would be maybe a genre I would pick up. Or not a genre, that would be maybe a book I'd pick up. And I also read When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill, which was also another 4-star, another historical fiction fantasy piece, if you're interested. It's definitely more historical fantasy than fiction, it's definitely more historical fiction than fantasy, even though it does talk about dragons a lot, but a lot of what you follow is really just a story of a girl's life. And the other 2 books I will mention are both in the horror genre. So I read Small Favors and What Moves the Dead. So Small Favors, I can't remember who the author was. I'll put it up on the screen, but it's a YA book. It's a YA horror. I rated this 3 stars. It was okay, but once again, it was kind of just a slice of life. There were some horror elements, but it seemed like, you were just reading. It was just very slow, not really thrilling, not scary, not. It's just kind of a weird little story. It was okay. And What Moves the Dead, I rated 3.5. What Moves the Dead, I checked out because it is a T. Kingfisher book, and to be honest, it's probably my least favorite T. Kingfisher, but that's probably because it's a short story. So there weren't a lot of where I wanted details and exploration that didn't happen. So that was kind of why I didn't enjoy that book. And so I will, I'll link all those videos if you guys are wanting more information about those books, but those will be also in my data set that I'm keeping to try and figure out which genres I prefer and what I prefer about those genres. Okay, so what's next? What is on my TBR for the next episode? So I have 3 books for you guys. I'm going to tend to stick with 3 and 3. I just think it works well. And then, like I said, I'll post other books if I find any along the way that also fit into this series. But the first book I want to read is another historical fiction / fantasy, and that is The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. So Dr. Moreau is, or The Island of Dr. Moreau is a book that I read in college and really enjoyed, and so I'm hoping that this is kind of an extension of that, and we get to follow his daughter. I think I was drawn to this because of The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter has the daughter of Dr. Moreau in it, and I don't know, I think it'll be interesting to kind of follow just her and her life. And I know it's going to be different than that because it's not a mystery, but we'll see. The fantasy horror that I want to put on my TBR is Juniper and Thorn, and I don't really know anything about this book. I've just heard it a couple of places, and a couple of my favorite booktubers have read it and enjoyed it, and so I want to try it out. And the last book that I'm going to put on the list is a fantasy mystery, and that is Magic for Liars. So this book is about a detective, like a mystery, a murder mystery involving magic is pretty much all I know about it. I do think I really enjoy mysteries. I think I said earlier, like The Strange Case of the Alchemist's Daughter, I think I put that as historical fiction, which it definitely fits into that, but it also fits into mystery. So I think it's kind of all of those genres, and I really enjoyed the mystery aspect of that. It was fun to kind of follow the ladies solve this mystery, and so that's kind of what led me to Magic for Liars. I don't know if those books are anywhere comparable, but that's where I got to this point, and we'll see if I like it in the months to come. Thank you guys so much for watching episode 2 of Fantasy Genre Blends. I am really excited about this series. I hope that it leads me down some weird paths in fantasy, that I can find some hidden gems and hopefully share them with you guys as well. If you have any recommendations for me, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.